Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Oscar entered my wife Patricia's life through a mutual friend, and soon a connection formed between them. They began spending more and more time together, regularly meeting. I never saw Oscar as a real threat. He was always polite and sociable, but beneath the surface there was an elusive tension. In situations involving infidelity, especially when it concerns another man's wife, a certain caution is always required. While I was busy with work or away from home, they continued their secret meetings, caught up in the excitement of it all. However, despite all the thrill, something was missing, as they later confessed to me. One cold winter night became a turning point. Patricia invited Oscar over under the pretense of a casual evening with card games after dinner. He arrived around 7 in the evening, and Patricia greeted him with an embrace that seemed warm and sincere. At first, the embrace didn't alarm me. After all, they were friends. We settled in the living room, and I offered to get Oscar a beer from the kitchen. When I returned, what I saw deeply troubled me. They were sitting close together, holding hands, with Patricia's hand resting on his thigh. I couldn't hide my confusion and blurted out, "What's going on here?" Their faces tensed, as if they were preparing to tell me something that would shake me to the core. Patricia spoke first, her voice steady. "Darling, we need to talk, but please sit down." Despite the growing sense of unease, I sat down, bracing myself for what was to come. "Oscar and we've been close for 6 months," she began. "There's a connection between us that we couldn't ignore. One thing led to another." Her tone was calm, as if she was discussing something entirely reasonable. "I still care about you," she continued. "I never wanted to hurt you. That's why we've come up with a way that could work for all of us." At that moment, Oscar took over. "We can't just stop," he said, emotionless. "The chemistry between us is undeniable, but we don't want to exclude you from this. Our plan is to keep being together, but we want you to be involved too. You can watch and maybe sometimes even participate." He smiled, as if what he was proposing was completely logical. Patricia picked up on his idea. "This could even be enjoyable for you," she added with a smile. "I know what you look at online. I've seen the websites you visit." She seemed amused by my discomfort. "I checked your browser history. You're always searching for things like this on adult sites. So I thought this might interest you more than you're willing to admit." Her confidence was startling. "It might even improve our marriage," she suggested. Oscar pointed to some documents Patricia had pulled out of her bag. "All we're asking is that you sign this agreement. The terms are clearly laid out," he said as she placed the papers in front of me. The conditions were detailed: kisses, embraces, shared showers, or sleep. My head was spinning, my mouth dry, and I could barely speak. Patricia kept insisting, "I love you, but I also love Oscar. What he gives me is something I can't easily let go of. It's not about replacing you, it's just different." Oscar nodded, affirming her words. "Just sign the papers," she urged. "This is how things are now." I felt completely lost. Divorce wasn't what I wanted, but how could I agree to watch my wife with another man? As I looked at them, still holding hands, Patricia interrupted my thoughts with one final blow. "Maybe this will help you make your decision." She leaned in and kissed Oscar, pulling him closer. He responded, gently touching her cheek. I froze, watching as my wife passionately kissed another man right in front of me. Amid the shock, something stirred within me, a feeling I desperately tried to suppress but couldn't hide. Oscar noticed it first, his smile widening. "See?" he said with a smirk. "You like it." Patricia handed me the pen. The documents lay before me, the pen in my hand, and I hesitated, unsure if signing was the right thing to do. I exhaled heavily, feeling utterly confused and disoriented. I've encountered many cases of infidelity, but they were always part of my job. As a private detective running a security firm, I was used to divorce investigations taking up a large portion of my work. Looking back, I realize I didn't pay enough attention to the signs in my own life. When everything started to fall apart, I instinctively switched into professional mode. Clearly, they didn't see that coming. Calmly, I pulled out my small recorder and pressed the button. I wanted to ensure that every word of our conversation was recorded, just in case any disputes arose later. "I hope you both understand how serious this is," I began. "These discussions carry significant legal weight." My eyes skimmed over the documents lying in front of me. They were already signed and notarized. "I see you've both taken care of your part," I added. Oscar, as casual as ever, responded, "Yeah, we wanted to speed things up. We knew you'd agree eventually." He smirked. "Our notary, Geraldine, will be here soon to finalize your part. Then we can wrap this up." His enthusiasm reminded me of a child eagerly waiting to open birthday presents. I paused and asked the question that had been bothering me for a long time. "For the record, how long has this been going on behind my back?" The full reality of the situation hit me as Patricia's voice trembled in response. "Well, we've been married for 20 years, but for the past 4, I've been with Oscar." "But please, don't say it like that." She immediately became defensive. "Oscar is my soulmate. What we have is real, not what you're thinking." It was astonishing how far this had gone, and I hadn't noticed a thing. My irritation started to build. "So, this is how it is?" I muttered under my breath. "Don't act so righteous, Oliver," she snapped. "There's enough love to go around." I looked at them both, and it finally hit me that the marriage I thought was real had been nothing but a facade. Quietly, I picked up the pen, signed the document, and stood up. "I hope this makes you both happy," I said, handing over the papers. But instead of passing them over neatly, I scrawled across the page, "Not a chance." Patricia's eyes widened in shock when she saw what I had done. "What the hell are you doing, Oliver?" she yelled. I shrugged, my voice turning icy. "I don't share," I said dryly. My gaze shifted to Oscar, who stood there stunned. I grabbed a bottle of beer, took a slow sip, and then, with deliberate force, crumpled the contract and shoved it into my back pocket. Raising the bottle in their direction, I popped the cap off, spraying beer onto their smug faces. Without a word, I packed up my briefcase, laptop, and jacket, ignoring their outraged shouts, and headed for the door. Just as I was about to leave, I ran into Geraldine, the notary. She raised an eyebrow and smirked. "Looks like I showed up just in time for the fireworks," she said dryly. "You must be Oliver. Good luck with this mess," she added with a sarcastic smile. I got into my truck, reversed hard, and sped off, tearing through the front yard and crushing Patricia's beloved roses. As I pulled out onto the street, I clipped the rear of Oscar's expensive car. Yes, it was petty, I admit, but at that moment, I didn't care. At least I wasn't the one headed to the morgue. I drove straight to her parents' house, determined to take control of the situation. Although I'd always gotten along well with my in-laws, I wasn't about to let them paint me as the villain in this story. My phone buzzed with messages and calls, but soon it all went silent. When I arrived, I pressed the doorbell. After a few moments, I heard the familiar grumbling from the other side of the door. All right, I'm coming," muttered Patricia's father, Judge Michael Miller, as the porch light flicked on. He opened the door, clearly unhappy to see me at such a late hour. "Oliver, what are you doing here? And where's Patricia?" His face creased with worry. Unable to hold back, I snapped, "I have no idea where she is, probably floating on cloud 9 somewhere." Despite their daughter's flaws, her parents had always treated me with respect, but tonight there was no room for pleasantries. I handed him the crumpled contract and placed the recorder on the table. "What's this?" he asked, confused. "Just read it," I replied sharply. As he began to read the document, his expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Is this really happening?" he asked quietly, almost in a whisper. He asked a question, and I pressed the button to start recording. First, I asked if it would be okay to record the conversation to avoid any misunderstandings. As the recording played, his wife focused intently on the sounds. At some point, she loosened her grip on the robe she was holding tightly, and it slightly opened. Her hand darted to her lips, as if trying to stifle a gasp. The robe slid down further, revealing a black nightgown, elegant in its design. I couldn't help but think that his night had just gotten a lot worse. When the recording ended, he looked at me with an expression of complete helplessness. "There's no easy way out of this, is there?" he muttered, his voice heavy with resignation. "What would you do in my place?" His gaze fell, and a shiver ran through his body. "I understand, son." Then, the ring of the old landline phone shattered the silence. His wife quickly grabbed the receiver. "Hello? Mom? If Oliver is there, I need to talk to him right now." Her father immediately took the phone. "What's going on? Is there a problem?" A shout came from the other end. "Dad, what are you even talking about?" "This doesn't concern you or Mom," she said firmly. "This is between me and my husband. You need to get everything in writing, make a contract, or you'll drag everyone else into this." I could hear the voices in the background growing louder, and then there was a sudden, "Oh no." "We know everything," her father whispered into the phone before ending the call. He turned to me, exhaling deeply. "Take a break, son. Handle what needs to be done, but don't make any rash decisions, all right?" "Yes, sir. I'm sorry for everything," I replied quietly. Placing a firm hand on my shoulder, he said, "This isn't your fault, son. Sometimes, no matter how well you tend to the garden, a snake will still find its way in." With those words, I left, got into my truck, and drove straight to the hotel where I had rented a room for the week. That evening, I was overwhelmed with rage and took it out on the minibar, smashing a few bottles before collapsing on the bathroom floor, feeling unbearably sick. Somehow, I managed to drag myself into the shower, clothes still on, and rinse off. After stripping off the wet clothes, I collapsed onto the bed and passed out. When I woke up the next morning, I still felt dazed. Realizing I didn't have any clean clothes, I called David Murphy, one of the few friends left who wasn't tied to my wife. I asked him to stop by and bring fresh clothes to room 620. David sounded concerned and asked what was going on. I promised to explain when he arrived. "Oh, and grab a couple of sandwiches and some coffee. I need you to get here as soon as possible." After that, I contacted the office to arrange surveillance on my wife and her lover. I called the bank to freeze all our personal and business accounts. Then, I settled the balance on our joint credit cards and closed them. I also disconnected her phone since it was registered under my company. Finally, I arranged to have all the utilities in the house turned off. Once all that was taken care of, I got in touch with a lawyer who recommended one of the best divorce specialists. "My brother's the best in the business if you want to make a real impact. Tell him I sent you, and he'll handle everything." Once everything was organized, the plan seemed straightforward. As I was wrapping up the final details, David arrived. I quickly got dressed, and we went out to grab breakfast. While I filled him in on what had happened, I was also consulting with the new lawyer about the next steps. We scheduled a meeting for 5 p.m. to discuss how to proceed. David shook his head in disbelief. "I can't believe she did this. Not just the affair, but a contract too?" "Yeah," I sighed, "but there's still more that needs to be dealt with." "Take your time, man," he said, his voice full of understanding. "I never liked that Oscar guy. Now I know why. If you need anything at all, Mary and I are here for you." Mary, David's wife, had always treated me like family, like a younger brother. Knowing they would stand by me in this mess gave me at least a little comfort in the middle of this storm. After he left, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. My appearance was far from perfect, although it was a slight improvement compared to the previous day. After getting dressed, I headed straight to the bank. The moment I stepped inside, I was immediately escorted to the office of the senior vice president. I wasn't a millionaire, but my personal and business accounts were substantial enough to command their full attention. As soon as I sat down, he got straight to the point. "I'm not sure I understand why you're here. Yes, it's your money, and you have every right to do with it as you please, but perhaps there's something that might make you reconsider." Now, guess who worked there? That's right, Oscar, the senior financial advisor. I calmly placed the contract on the vice president's desk and turned on the voice recorder. His expression shifted from confusion to horror as he skimmed the document. But when he truly grasped the seriousness of what he was reading and hearing, his face turned a ghastly shade of white. "This is some kind of joke," he muttered in a trembling voice. I assure you this is no joke, I replied, my voice steady and growing louder. I am no longer doing business with a company that employs a scoundrel who sleeps with my wife behind my back. I raised my voice so the entire office could hear. I snatched the contract from his shaking hands and took the voice recorder. I couldn't help but think about how many others had been deceived in a similar manner. Tell Oscar Garcia that he'll be receiving legal papers soon. Have a nice day. As I walked out the door, I heard the vice president scream in panic, "Get Garcia in here immediately!" I allowed myself a quiet laugh as I left the building. Next, I went to a stationery store to make 3 copies of the contract. I knew the original had to be kept safe until my lawyer had reviewed it. After that, I headed to my insurance agent's office, and as luck would have it, guess who worked there? Yes, my soon-to-be ex-wife. I was quickly ushered into the office of the company owner, Miss Victoria Lee. As I passed by, I heard someone whisper, "Oliver," but I didn't pay it any mind, just smiled politely. Miss Lee rose from behind her desk and extended her hand for a greeting, though her uncertainty was evident. "Oliver, it's nice to see you. How can we help you today?" Her voice sounded tense. I didn't waste any time. "I'm sure you know why I'm here, Victoria. I'm canceling all my policies with your company as of today. I expect a refund immediately. I can't continue doing business with a company that employs a liar and a cheat." Her eyes widened in shock, her voice hardening. "Hold on, Oliver. Your personal issues shouldn't impact your business decisions with us." I didn't respond. Instead, I threw a copy of the contract on her desk. "Do you need to listen to the recording?" I asked. She looked at the document, her eyes pausing on the notary seal and signature. I saw her tense up. Without a word, she pressed the intercom button. "Patricia, come to my office." Moments later, Patricia, my soon-to-be ex-wife, entered, visibly shaken. "Yes, Miss Lee," she muttered. Without hesitation, Victoria spoke. "You're fired. Pack your things and leave the building immediately." Patricia wobbled and then fainted with a group of employees rushing to her aid. Unfazed, Miss Lee turned back to me. "Is your decision still final?" I stood up, shook her hand, and replied, "It's a pleasure to do business with people of principle. I think I'll continue working with your company after all." With that, I stepped over my unconscious former wife and headed straight to my lawyer. Callum Sampson, my attorney, was slightly older than me, but his sharp mind and resourcefulness made him seem much younger. He invited me in, offered me a drink, and asked his secretary to bring us some water. "So, Oliver," he began with a sly glint in his eye, "I talked to my sister, and she hinted that I'd like this. What have you brought me today?" After completing the draft agreement, I reached for the recorder and turned it on. When the recording finished, he seemed more engrossed in the document I handed him than in the actual playback. As soon as the tape fell silent, he leaned towards the intercom and pressed a button. His assistant quickly entered the office. "Linda, make 2 copies of this recording and put the original in the safe," he instructed, "and bring Mr. Daniels a new tape and recorder." He continued to study the contract, occasionally giving me attentive, curious glances. When he finally put the document down, his full attention turned to me. This is genuine, isn't it? No one could fabricate something like this out of thin air." He paused for a moment, contemplating the situation. "So what do you plan to do next?" "I want to destroy them," I said, my voice calm but brimming with malice. "I want them to suffer so much that they'll never find peace, work, or a future." A slow smile spread across his face. "In all my years, I've never come across anything like this. I wouldn't walk away from this case even if I were offered a fortune. Let's start by calling in a notary to certify everything." Leaning back in his chair with confidence, he added, "I've worked with her before. She's reliable. Once everything is notarized, we'll authenticate the recording. Then we'll head straight to the jury. They won't know what hit them." I nodded. "They're already on the brink of being fired. I've caused them trouble both at work and with the bank, but I know we can finish them off. And if this case goes to trial, you'll take it pro bono?" His eyes lit up as he leaned toward me. "Of course. They have no grounds for a defamation suit. We have ironclad evidence. As long as we stick to the truth, they're powerless. At that moment, I realized there was no way out for them. They had orchestrated their own downfall. We brought in the notary, and after reviewing the situation, she confirmed it without hesitation. Their actions were a blatant attempt to manipulate the system for their own gain. My lawyer, Callum, arranged a meeting with the judge, explaining the essence of our case. The judge looked at me with understanding and determination. "I understand how important this is for you, Oliver. I'll do everything in my power to ensure justice is served. But are you sure you want the jury to hear every detail?" My lawyer intervened. "Your Honor, my client demands full justice. He wants the marriage annulled without any financial compensation to the woman who betrayed him and her accomplice." The judge agreed. "Very well. Prepare the necessary documents and we'll see if the opposing side is willing to comply." We approached them, offering the option to either sign or consult a lawyer. Their response was immediate and full of rage. Both were on the verge of financial ruin, barely able to pay their utility bills, with unemployment looming over them. She adamantly refused to sign, and he clung to the hope of a hefty payout. In desperation, they found a lawyer willing to represent their interests. But they didn't know they were walking into a trap. They hid both the contract and the recording from their lawyer. When we met in Callum's office, everything was laid out on the table. My lawyer meticulously authenticated the recording in their presence. They arrived at 9 a.m., accompanied by her father, and the tension in the room was palpable. They were filled with fear, mixed with anticipation. Patricia, always the dramatist, approached me as if she were about to embrace me. I kept my distance, standing firm. Instead, I directed a caustic remark at her former lover. Patricia began to weave a web of excuses, blaming me for their ruined lives. Both had lost their jobs and now stood on the brink of financial collapse, with no prospects for the future. In response, I handed her a waiver of claims to the house. But without money, and with their lives in shambles, the document was useless to them. After several unsuccessful attempts to sell the property, it became clear that fate was not on their side. She was increasingly desperate for my return, to her world, her bed, and especially her financial affairs. However, my lawyer did not ignore their request. He responded with a question: "Is Mr. Garcia still in your life?" Her lawyer, wasting no time, dismissed the question as irrelevant. "We're just friends," he confidently stated. But my lawyer wasn't convinced. Calmly, he pulled out a document from his stack and slid it across the table toward her lawyer. "Let's try again," he said, staring intently at Patricia while her lawyer began reading the document. "Are you still involved with Mr. Garcia?" Patricia's face turned pale, and she looked as though she might crumble under the pressure. "I don't think I can answer that," she stammered, almost whispering. "It's too personal." My lawyer remained unfazed. "Don't worry," he said in an even tone. "In court, you'll be required to answer under oath." Leaning back in my chair, I felt a growing sense of satisfaction watching their situation spiral out of control. When her lawyer finished reading the contract, he looked like he was about to be sick. "You missed this earlier," he muttered toward my lawyer. "It's just rumors. You don't have solid proof." But my lawyer was prepared. Without losing a second, he produced a signed witness statement from their notary, Geraldine Schultz, and then my notarized statement detailing all the conversations and requests. And then came the decisive blow, an audio recording. "This," my lawyer said as he played the recording, "is the proof. Your clients knew what was going on and were fully involved in it." As the recording played, the panic on her lawyer's face was obvious, and then her father, who, by the way, was a judge, could no longer stay silent. He slammed his palm on the table, glaring at the lawyer. "Enough, Patricia." Then, turning to Patricia, his voice grew firm. "Sign the papers. Stop disgracing yourself. As for Garcia, I want him gone by tomorrow evening. His name came up in the divorce case, and he'll need a lawyer before Oliver makes his ruling." His words became even sharper when he addressed Patricia directly. "You're not going to get anything out of this. If this goes to court, you'll end up with even less. Your mother and I are deeply disappointed. Your brother has already said he won't bring his family over while you're living with us. You need to find somewhere else to live. Now your choice is Oscar, isn't it? You chose him over your husband. Maybe it will work out for you." Though under his breath, he muttered, "Not that I believe it will." As it turned out, Patricia's parents had been paying her legal fees all this time. With no other choice, she signed the papers, and Garcia swiftly disappeared from our lives. I had nothing to do with his sudden disappearance. 2 months later, I was officially divorced. It happened last night. Tonight, the Jones sisters promised to cheer me up, and tomorrow they'll be back again. I have to admit, life doesn't seem so bad anymore. Patricia lived with her parents for a while, but they eventually told her she had to live on her own and move forward. For a long time, Patricia couldn't find a job and bounced between staying with different friends until she eventually got involved in escort work. Yes, it sounds strange, but she did it. Maybe it's her calling. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. On Friday morning, my wife, with a casual yet unsettling ease, informed me of her evening plans, adding that she might not return until the next day. There was a smoothness in her voice, a rehearsed quality that made it clear, whatever I said, it wouldn't change her decision. She reassured me that she still loved me, but the coldness in her eyes said otherwise. This was my first real experience confronting the harsh reality of infidelity in marriage, something I had only heard about in movies, novels, or whispered conversations among friends. I stood there, absorbing her carefully chosen words. She spoke as though I should take pride in my ability to handle this, mentioning that she never had the chance to truly enjoy her youth before getting married, and claiming that monogamy was an unnatural construct for humans. She criticized society's rigid norms regarding relationships and intimacy. "It's just physical," she declared. "It's not love." She even promised that if I allowed her this freedom, she would pay more attention to me. I braced myself for the familiar justifications. She told me I had no say in the matter, emphasized her autonomy over her body, and pointed out that life is short, and she deserved every pleasure she could get, including being with other men. She didn't shy away from discussing the physical differences between them, as if that somehow justified her actions. This wasn't about intelligence or wealth. It was purely physical. For the record, I've never had issues with either. But how do you modestly state that you're a rather intelligent man with considerable financial success? It's hard to do that without sounding conceited. Professionally, I'm an engineer, and my work has brought me significant wealth. My wife never had any complaints about that. When she finally finished her speech, I could have easily responded with the anger bubbling up from my growing frustration. As she leaned in for what she called a farewell kiss, my response was simple: I'd rather not. There are moments when the absurdity of a situation leaves you speechless, and this was one of them. Her expression twisted with shock, her mouth slightly open, clearly expecting me to start ranting about loyalty, vows, or perhaps even threaten revenge. But all I could offer was, I'd rather not. People often underestimate the power of restraint, the power of a quiet refusal. My simple rejection was my way of reclaiming some semblance of control. Of course, she immediately launched into a new tirade, accusing me of being disrespectful and calling my reaction childish. She finished by saying that I would have to accept her decision or learn to live without her. I'd rather not, I repeated, this time more calmly. For the first time, I saw a crack in her confidence. She hesitated, her resolve wavering. I didn't beg, didn't yell, didn't cry. I just stood there firmly holding my ground. Sensing her power slipping away, she changed tactics, offering compromises. She suggested that instead of staying out all night, she could return after the date, reminding me that I was still important, offering her body as consolation. Again, I replied, I'd rather not. That phrase seemed to dismantle her carefully constructed arguments, leaving her momentarily speechless. But then she switched to her familiar role as an attorney, something she never fully became. Years ago, when we were still dating, she struggled through law school. I vividly remember one of her classes where they drafted prenuptial agreements. At the time, she took it very seriously, and we eventually signed one, making it legally binding. So, when she threatened to take the house, the assets, and parade her lovers through my home if I decided to file for divorce, I simply stood there, waiting for the inevitable collapse of her arguments. She had barely finished speaking when I replied, "I'd prefer not to do that." She didn't return that night for me to pull her back into my arms. Saturday passed without a trace, neither by day nor under the stars at night. It wasn't until the final light of Sunday faded that she finally appeared at the doorstep, looking utterly exhausted, as if life itself had drained every ounce of strength from her. She carelessly dropped her bag onto the terrace, where it landed next to the grill where I stood, focused on cooking ribeye. The steak sizzled, and its aroma filled the evening air. I didn't even glance in her direction. I thought, you wouldn't want to kiss me now, would you? My attention remained on dinner. I was brushing marinade on the meat and flipping the corn on the side. "Will you make some for me too?" she asked quietly. "I'd prefer not to do that," I answered indifferently. "I see," she sighed. "I should have expected that. Is that your favorite phrase now? All I get from you is, 'I'd prefer not to do that,' huh?" She let out a disappointed breath. "This is starting to get old, you know." I turned slightly to respond, but she cut me off. "No, don't even say anything. I'm tired." "Silence. That's your punishment for me, isn't it? Fine, but we can't avoid talking forever. You'll have to speak at some point. Is this it? Is this how it's going to end?" Her voice trembled as she asked, "Are you going to file for divorce?" Desperation seeped into her words. 3 years together in college, then 15 years of marriage, 18 years together. Are you really going to leave because I wasn't home for 2 weekends while you explored? She took a deep breath, trying her hardest to stay composed. I've carried this weight for so long. I needed to feel something else, something I couldn't shake off. When we got married, I thought everything was clear. I love you, I always will. But I couldn't stop wondering what it would be like with another man. What's it like in bed? Would it be different? I needed to know the difference, to feel what it's like to not just be loved, but to be conquered, to be the heroine of those novels where the cowboy or the estate owner sweeps the woman away. I'm sorry, but I had to experience that. You're an amazing husband, an incredible lover. But I needed to understand that I had to explore. God forgive me. Don't just stand there. Say something. Anything. Calmly, I placed the steak and corn onto a toasted bun, added a slice of grilled peach, and for the first time since she walked in, I looked her directly in the eyes. I'd prefer not to do that. Her face twisted in pain. No, please don't shut me out like this. Yell at me, be angry, hit me if that helps, but don't give me this cold silence. I know I messed up. I'll do anything to fix it. Just don't leave me like this. My response was the same. I'd prefer not to do that. Tensions were rising. No, I didn't cook her a steak. For a moment, I even thought about intentionally burning something. In the days that followed, she tried to start conversations with me, but every time, I calmly and firmly responded, I'd prefer not to do that. When she finally asked what I wanted instead, I just shrugged. I didn't walk away when she tried to talk to me, but I never asked for details about what had happened either. It was obvious she was desperately seeking reconciliation. The following Friday, she came home later than usual, nervously recounting a party with her colleagues, how they had a good time, laughing and drinking together. Then she noticed the lack of dinner and the way I was dressed, ready to go out. Her voice shook with uncertainty. "What's going on? Are we going somewhere?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. A moment later, realization dawned on her. "Oh, you're not taking me with you, are you? Was that really my outcome? Are you going to come back to me?" I slightly shook my head and replied with a familiar phrase. "I wouldn't want to," I said, then turned away and left. My evening was already planned. I was going to have dinner with my parents, who had come for the weekend. I arranged for them to stay at a hotel by the river, far enough from the tense atmosphere of the house. They already knew about the situation, but we still had a wonderful evening, ending with dinner on a river cruise. When I returned home, it was 11 p.m., and I still felt clear-headed and balanced. I was met by my tear-streaked wife. Without saying a word, I immediately went to bed. I can't say what was going through her head, but when I woke up the next morning, the smell of breakfast was already spreading through the house. This time, she didn't wait for an invitation to speak. "Last night was terrible," she began. "You left me alone. I couldn't stop imagining you with someone else." "It was an awful feeling," she admitted. "I think I now understand what you went through when I was gone for that whole weekend. Can I ask you something, and will you answer me honestly? Were you with another woman last night?" Considering the facts, since I did spend the evening with my parents, one of whom is my mother, technically another woman, I answered honestly, yes. Her reaction was ambiguous. On one hand, the thought of me being with another woman clearly heightened her anxiety. However, my answer had a different meaning for her. It wasn't what she expected. Our conversation wasn't unpleasant. I finished breakfast, grabbed my golf clubs, and went out for the day. I spent the day playing golf with my father. Despite being 60, he still swung the club with the energy of his younger days. Many years ago, he earned respect working with the Special Olympics, first as a coach, and then over the years as a state director. During the game, we talked about everything except my marriage. I got home just in time to freshen up and get ready for dinner. As I was heading downstairs, dressed in a tuxedo and on my way to the garage, my wife stopped me halfway. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and her mouth slightly opened. "She must be special if you're dressed like that," she remarked. I just nodded. "Honestly," she added, "you look stunning. No one can compare to you when you're dressed like that." Our anniversary dinners were always unforgettable. "Whoever she is, she's lucky," she sighed. "You're not going to tell me who she is, are you?" I shook my head. "No. I see. I understand everything," she said quietly. "I know I ruined everything. I rejected you and spent that weekend humiliating you. I shouldn't have treated you like that." She continued recounting her weekend. "I'll regret it for the rest of my life. That Friday night, we stopped for a burger before the concert. He said we had great seats, so I dressed up. You saw me, didn't you? I looked good. But when we got there, the seats were so far away that I couldn't even see the stage with binoculars. And then he had the nerve to make me buy him a beer. And I was the one driving, my car, my gas, and I paid for dinner. My so-called exciting evening, it started with the stingiest man in town. On the way back, he tried to make a move on me. When we reached the neighborhood, I waited for the red light, jumped out of the car, and ran to a bar where a blues band was playing. He tried to follow me, but, you know Eric, the bouncer who works at the live shows there. I told Eric that this guy was harassing me and that I felt uncomfortable. Can you imagine? He acted as if I owed him something. Inside, I met a guy from work, who was there with friends. We spent the rest of the evening together, and later, since he was too drunk to drive, I gave him a ride home. But when we arrived, I faced the biggest emotional wreck I'd ever seen. He passed out, leaving me alone on his couch. The next morning, I woke up to find him sprawled across me, muttering something about how he was going to fix everything. My response was sharp, full of sarcasm. I asked how he could possibly do that, given his complete lack of masculinity. That's when I completely lost my bearings. Instead of seeing things for what they were, instead of appreciating what I had at home and coming back to you, I convinced myself that I needed to reclaim my femininity, to feel desired again. I ended up at a bar. I was about to leave with some guy when his wife burst in, her face blazing with anger. To deflect suspicion, I slapped him across the face and screamed, "So you're married?" Funny enough, I never took off my own wedding rings. Later, I wandered to a seaside diner. A man approached me, openly flirting. He was charming and kept the conversation flowing easily. He looked into my eyes, not at my body. I was almost ready to give in to his charm when suddenly 2 small children ran up, shouting, "Grandpa, Grandpa, we found you!" He disappeared faster than I could comprehend what had just happened. Then I booked a room at a rundown motel, bought a bottle of wine, and sat on the balcony, hoping to find peace and clarity. But below, a group of women, single, divorced, were talking loudly. Their conversation soon turned to men, and they started discussing their failed relationships, listing names and sharing humiliating details. I quickly realized my situation wasn't unique at all. They described their exes as lustful old men and misers. I couldn't help but agree. After all, no woman can expect every man to treat her as an equal or pay for everything. These women talked about married men, supposedly loyal, who cheated for no understandable reason. They discussed the variety of men they had dated, men from different cultures, races, religions, even political beliefs. They debated how important a man's size was compared to his ability to provide. They agreed that if you find someone who is both attentive and well-endowed, he's worth holding on to. I almost got up to return to you, but I stayed to hear more, and I'm glad I did. After that, I heard nothing else. I spent the rest of the night lost in thoughts of you. I woke up right there on the balcony, under the morning sun that had already begun to scorch my skin. I felt terrible in every way. The guilt over what I put you through weighed on me. My body ached after spending the night in an uncomfortable position on a lounge chair. My stomach churned from the awful food and 2 bottles of wine I drank the night before. My head throbbed from all of it combined. I arranged for a late checkout and collapsed back into bed. When I finally managed to get up, I took a shower, got dressed, and went back home. That night, when I left, I had every intention of betraying you, but I didn't go through with it. Somehow, fate intervened. It stopped me from making that mistake, reminding me that I belong only to you. Only you. Please forgive me. Please let me remain your wife. Let's forget this mistake and return to the happiness we had. Please. Her voice trembled, her eyes filled with tears. I couldn't help but feel pity for her. I really did feel pity, but what I couldn't feel was love. I looked into those tearful eyes I once adored and gave her my answer. I wished I didn't have to do it. I never told her about the other woman in my life, my mother. I didn't say whether I believed her desperate story about how she lost control that weekend. I said I loved her because I wasn't sure if I did or not. In everything else, I remained silent. And she, on the other hand, never stopped fighting for us. Over time, she made several attempts to reconnect with me, but I successfully avoided her efforts by immersing myself in work, often going on business trips or staying late in the city. When she asked me questions, my responses were reduced to non-verbal gestures, a brief nod if I agreed or a shake of the head to indicate disagreement, without any further explanation. I began sleeping in another room and deliberately arranged my schedule to avoid sharing meals with her. Eventually, the tension became unbearable for her. 7 months later, she cheated on me. I caught her in the arms of another man, a younger one, while she could barely stand on her feet at a bar. That same day, I consulted a lawyer. Thanks to our prenuptial agreement, within 2 months, I stripped her of all her property and savings. She was left without a home, without a loving husband, and without money. I had endured her antics for a long time, but everything has its limits. She got what she deserved. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.